feed the viewers with something, you know. Put some content out. Oh yeah, gotta put something out for the viewers. Got to do that. You know? Oh, by the way, hello viewers. Another beautiful day. Hope your five senses work. Health and strength is good or excellent. Good. Okay, listen up, you 486 lovers. 586. Huh? Listen to this. New Linux patch propose removing support for old i486 and early i586 CPUs. And they got 51 comments in the comment section. So it says here a set of Linux kernel patches posted today by longtime Linux kernel developer Ingo Molnar are looking to remove support for ancient 32-bit CPU. In particular, if these patches are accepted, the Linux kernel would be ending support for old 486 CPU as early as i586 CPU models. Says here, we really talk about or use in modern Linux environment, with many distribution ending their x86 32-bit hardware support, is that the kernel has retained support for old i486 from the early 90s. The patch series today, though, would end support for the original 486 processor as well as the 586 processor. The kernel patches would remove support for CPUs lacking TSC and CX8 CMP XCH G8B capabilities. Basically, this would put the minimum upstream Linux kernel support for 32-bit processor at the original Pentium CPU and CP XCH and timestamp counter TSC support. Even then, it'd be surprising to hear anyone spinning up a modern Linux kernel and modern software stack on their 586/Pentium 5, and these patches are just for dropping the CPU support of hardware even older than that. Says here, Ingo Molnar argues in the patch series that removing support for old 486 and early 586 processor will reduce maintenance burden on kernel developers. Doing away with the old hardware support will also lighten the kernel by over 14,000 lines of code. Yeah, time to move on, folks. Says here, Molnar wrote in this morning's RFC patch notes, in the x86 architecture we have various complicated hardware emulation facilities on x86-32 support ancient 32-bit CPUs that very few people are using with modern kernels. This compatibility glue is sometimes even causing problems that people spend time to resolve, which time could be spent on other things. As Linus recently remarked, I really get the feeling that it's time to leave 486 support behind. There's zero real reason for anybody to waste 1 second of development efforts on this kind of issue. The series increased minimum kernel support features to include TSC and CX8, and then it says CMPXCH G8B hardware support, which removes 486 and derivative support, early 586 derivative support. Doing this allows the removal of fair amount of code, 80 files change, 30 insertions, and 14,100 deletion, much of which is the math emu/library. But even without math emu, the simplification is substantial, and it says 32 file changes, 38 insertions, and 1,081 deletion. And it's about time to see this happen. And yeah, you got 51 comments in the comment section, and you know they about to sound off on this. So time to move on, folks. Yeah, I remember I remember, I think when I was upgrading to I think Ubuntu, I was using Ubuntu 18.4, and I was trying to run the latest 20.4 on an i386 architecture, and you had to move on to, because Ubuntu said they were moving on to Pentium. I remember even before that they were talking about moving on from 486, 386 to Pentium architecture. So, well, it's time to move on, man. Yeah, time to move on. And let's see what we got in the comment section. Let me see if I can tackle some of these comments here. So I can get a few of them. Let's see, what are we talking about here? Avis said this: realistically, they could have easily dropped support for anything prior to Pentium 3. I am not even sure Pentium 3 is worth supporting. It's dead slow to be able to run any modern kernel at sufficient speed. It's basically a potato, not potato. Anyway, and then who is this? Jab said this: what he says, you do not have permission to view this gallery. This gallery has one photo. See what he's talking about here. Anyway, who is this? And then V1 said this: I have an old HP notebook in ideal condition, office use only, new refurbished battery with a Celeron 1.6 upgrade to Pentium dual core 1.83. Unfortunately, single core only. It hangs on boot when multi-core is enabled in BIOS, and 3 gigs of our RAM can't be used for anything today. But back in the day, I used it to do my student work and watch anime in 720p, the screen resolution, without any problem. Let's see, who was this? And then who was this? Alpha said this: GOD LX800 remains supported. My router is a fit PC. And it says last edited by Alpha. Anyway, who else is this? So I guess one's comment here. And then who is this? Jab said this: it's not really about being too slow for some kind of general purpose usage. To be frank, for general purpose desktop or servers workload, arguably 32-bit x86 as a whole is dead. For the kernel, that is, though there is still some value in supporting a 32-bit userland for legacy binaries, but there still seems to be a small but not extinct market for embedded x86 device. As you can see in the LKML thread linked to in the article, those vendors by now moved on to Pentium compatible devices, so there's little reason to keep i486 support. So when bugs pop up when testing some combination of features that no modern system need, to reduce the testing matrix, they decide to drop support for the code nobody uses anymore, and sort of as a side effect, it bumps up the minimum required CPU. In this particular case, they want to drop support for CPU lacking TSC CX8 and 387 FP support, which as a side effect bumps the minimum something roughly Pentium compatible. This also happened back in 2012 when supporting the i386. I can attest to that, was dropped. It says here the motivation was to get rid of some tricky and likely broken code that nobody tests anymore. I can attest to that. Like I said, I had Ubuntu 18.4 and I was trying to get up to use 20, and the computer was like, nope, this is the cutoff point. So yeah, I'm guilty of that. But anyway, Jab said this: does it support TSC 68 or CX8 or 387? If yes, it should be okay. And then he give a link here, says it should have FPU, TSC, and CX8, which would imply it does support those features. And then Cal Gula said this: most 46 systems I know only have 4 to 32 megabytes of RAM. Totally unrealistic for modern kernels. He said, I don't know if the kernel even fits in RAM on those system. A modern slimmed down ZSTD compressed BZ image with support for a single GPU and file system like 10 megabytes. Yeah, it's time to move on, man. I'm just gonna get a couple of these comments, so let's see, get one more. And who is this? Midbag said this. Frankly, I did say any hardware that predates USB 1996 could be removed. In what way is modern kernel relevant to such devices? Just about every change doesn't apply to them. If anything, modern kernels are a detriment as they use up disk space that a lot of these antique systems don't have much to spare. Any new device made that can connect to these systems is obvious an in-house project that's likely wasn't going to see upstream kernel submission anyway. Any existing device that doesn't have driver isn't going to be written at this point. Regardless, no sane person is going to run anything security sensitive on a platform so old that I'm sure would chug from decrypting modern SSH keys. I might even go as far to say anything that predates PCIe could be removed too. Yeah, for much of the same reasons, sure, there are platforms from the late 90s or early 2000s that may still be usable today, and there are new USB 2.0 devices still being released, but most new devices require compute power, and these old systems can't keep up. Yeah, it's time to move on, man. Time to move on. Who else I got on the comment section here? And then who is this? Nate said this. Honestly, the sort of machine he's talking about removing support like 486 that needs meth emu. What he says, you couldn't even run Windows 98 on something like that. yeah, it's time to move on, man. Yeah, time to move on. I would agree. You know, like I remember when Ubuntu went up to the Pentium level, and I was still using a i386 architecture. Don't get me wrong, 18 is good, 16 is good, but when you're trying to go into them new like 20 and 20.4 and 22.4 and 24.4, you gotta go higher. Anyway, and then someone says finally someone actually uses the word ancient correctly. Normally they're using this word to describe AMD Zen 2 ridiculous. Anyway, he said, hey, he's responding to Midbag. He said, who is this? Weasel. He said, hey, you can configure Linux and drop most modules. You don't need such old devices. And who else is this? And then Kailu said this. Actually, I thought you could run Windows XP on a 486 from the support page. I recall seeing that. Unsure. Are you sure if you could fit the required amount of RAM though to use it, but processor was supported. Anyway, who was this? And then Word said this. Yep, this allowed removing the 387 emulator. 486 didn't have an FPU. Well, the early ones at least had a faulty one that was fused off the chip to disable it, apparently. And I think the kernel relies on TSC, so per article that emulates a lots of dead code. To those suggesting removing up through P3, well, I don't care. But the reality is Pentium through like Pentium 4, there is nowhere near the difference as 386 to 486 and 486 to all the earliest. Pentium, in terms of few new instructions that makes a big difference. Well, MMX SSE makes a difference to apps that use them, but don't make difference to the kernel. It falls back to a plain version of the checksum on chips without those instructions. Yeah, and if you want to learn these terminologies, You got to be doing like upgrading and repairing PCs to get the understanding of all this. Yeah, you know what they're talking. Anyway, what else we got here? And then who is this? Nate said this. He's replying to Lou. He said, "Not really. You really can't. Not without ridiculous steps." It says, with granular information determines diet Mars replace opcode that trips up the CPU with those that the 486 did understand. After all this detective work, adjustment to the code, and ironing out the various wrinkles, Diet Mar was successful. Yeah, and then someone says exactly this. It's difficult, impossible to run the modern kernel in less than 64 megabytes of memory. Yeah, this is 2025. You got to upgrade. It says that's why OpenWRT and the likes have dropped supporting hardware with 32 megabytes of memory. Time to upgrade, folks. See, I can get one more here. It says someone here says I ran Windows 98 on a 40 hertz AMD 8386DX. It says -40 with 16 megabytes of memory. It worked fine. If slow, Windows 98 required a math coprocessor. Facts. Windows 95 did not. Yep. And who else? Well, let me get the last one here. And then who is this? Developer said this: nobody complies RISC-V kernels on RISC-V device either, or even ARM kernels on ARM devices. Pretty much every embedded device get its kernel complied on a build farm. Embedded x86 is no exception. Anyway, so I'll just give you some comments, see what people are thinking. But hey, with the way computer information is right now, it was needed. They should have been got off this, I would say, since probably 2012. They should have been did it, you know. Well, why they took them so long, you know. Now you might understand why Linus was getting so upset when in that last Linux kernel that I did, you know. So yeah. But other than that, you guys are good though. News, deals, games, update, the usual. Figure I'll keep you Linux nerds up to date. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Nice talking to you people again. Crystal, Star Wars, Dark Side, Dark Side. I'll go. Peace.